more discussion, I think. Cool, that's my plan. Good morning, how are you? How are you? I'm doing well. Do you mind? Don't feel it. So probably got already.
I didn't know you were doing teas last Sunday.
I didn't either until Tuesday.
Oh, very good.
I learned a lot. Thanks. Yeah, it was kind of, I think someone was supposed to teach and they backed out. We had an opening.
30 minutes this morning. And because I didn't watch it, it's Tuesday, that takes.
My copy of Works of Love has arrived.
Oh, good.
When does that start?
September 5th.
September 5th.
Oh, yeah. So, it's right around the corner. No, already.
So it was published,
Yeah.
it was published in 1847. It wasn't published in English until 1946.
And you know who was one of the first people to get it translated?
Charles Williams,
Right,
but he died in 1945,
yeah.
but maybe.
He got some of his other stuff.
There's high level discussion about.
There's just one page and, the English book discusses Kierkegaard and Williams Association. It's a good page to read.
Yeah, he brought a lot
I'll bring that in so you can see. I just hadn't finished that book yet.
Okay, yeah,
Big single book.
yeah.
Felt.
I don't know why.
Yeah, she's not. Yeah.
I know her feelings.
Like,
I'm sure. Is she?
She's. I said that all on. Yeah.
They can switch it. Yeah. Different. Yeah. But she just realized that. So I gave her a call. So he had a thing on her leg. She made that. And she said. She's going to probably something to do with it. Just like Charlie and wake up. But his back on the walker is he doing something else. Okay.
But
He's usually a little bit.
No, I was.
Oh. Sorry.
I saw him in the house.
I don't know. He's excited to go to Chautauqua.
Yes. His team might be the first I think still.
No, it's happened.
Sometimes it's. Sometimes. Yes. Sometimes I wake up, I know, and I
Just doing it.
and it's the best. So I wish I had. No, I started doing this.
I'm working.
How are you?
She's a dude.
Oh, well.
She thought she's from this.
Yeah, one time when we got here, before I started working here, someone came up to me and said, "You're not Will." I said, "No, I'm sorry." They thought they misspelled my name.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm much lesser known than Will.
Have you ever met him?
Have not.
So our attendance today is sort of a lesson in what happens over the course of the summer.
Either people are worn out because the end of the summer coming, or they're gearing up for the fall. Happens in August. Just making it a little space for people to come a little later. I saw a guy nearby.
Yeah, he's loving it.
He's Methodist, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
And I get something like she wears it. All around. Cheers.
Yeah.
So good to see you all. We'll just take a few more minutes to visit while folks are filtering in. Once Guy comes in and is seated, then we'll really start.
Shall we all stay?
He's in the kitchen.
Did you get a vacation this year? Small ones. I went to Smokies, did a canoe trip to the back to your campsite with a friend from seminary that lives in Nashville, with a chaplain at Asheville. And
Where do you canoe?
Fontana Lake. Yeah, so we put in, I guess it's called cable buildings. Across the lake, you know.
She'll be in.
Pretty decent sized creek. It's called Hazel Street.
Yeah.
And there's a back, just like back there. It's really neat. There's a town out at the end that's flooded that area. And so a lot of the buildings are supposed to.
Here he is.
And you can just go walk inside. Oh, yeah, I'm more of a kayaker, but my friends are canoeers, so we did.
Have you been up to the, if you go sometime, Boundary Waters? Minnesota.
So my
Well, that's what it
friend that I was with guided up there.
When I read those articles.
With the Eagle Scout, they all have a, so he guided those trips. Which was, they got lots of good stories.
Identify with that.
Oh, okay.
You know, like, that, like I was in becoming.
Hey, friend. Want to let you know what's on your table. We have one reading front back that is some autobiographical information about Debbie Thomas, who is the author of both of our essays today. And then another that is front back with the Matthew version of John the Baptist being beheaded and Jesus' reaction to that and the feeding of the 5,000. And so that is there for reference as it comes up in her first essay. And then there's some paper and pens, which we may use throughout our time together, but we shall see. Okay, couple of updates. Next week, we will be reading and we'll read an essay to be prepared for Will to Lead, and he's got one that is being printed and I'm sure will come down for us to pick up before class is over. And then the following week, Guy will have chosen something and he's going to lead us, and that will be our last summer book study week. So just so you know where we are in the timeline. Also, a couple of updates on people. In case some of you don't know, Kathy Fuqua had a big fall in the Kroger parking lot last Friday. She fell and she said she just didn't see kind of a big hole in the pavement and fell, and she broke her arm clean through. So it's not gonna be surgery or anything, but she does have to really let it heal, and then we'll have to do some rehab with that. She does have a surgeon guiding her, even though they're not expecting to have to do surgery. She also boogered up her face pretty bad
So she's dealing, technical term. So she was dealing with a pretty swollen lip, which was just kind of always in the way. So if you will keep her in prayer. She does have neighbors and friends that are providing food for her. She also is the one who leads off our our congregational care meal train. She's the one who usually asks people to do that. So she promised to let me know if she's gonna need some of that help. So we'll let people know, but please do keep her in your prayers. Also, George Crawford, saw him yesterday. He had a tumble in his room and then wasn't found right away. And so then he ended up in the hospital, but now he's over at Woodcrest in rehab. And he was looking a lot like himself yesterday. His son, George III, was there with him. So keep him in prayer as he is recuperating from that.
He was there 2 days.
Yeah, I think that's true, and he didn't have his wristband on. Do you have one? Is that what you're wearing?
Yes.
Mhm. Now, does it automatically, if you fall, does it detect that, or do you have to push it?
You have to push it, 3 times, push it and hold it 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
Yeah, you have to know.
Yeah, have to have it on.
Yes.
So prayers for him. Any other happy things or concerning things? Let's
We're
see.
sending a card to Catherine Renstetter. She lost her mother, and Marnie Adams and Allison Duffy's brother died. So I'll be sending cards to them. Very good.
Got word yesterday that Rachel and Jared Mace's son Eric and his wife had a baby,
Really?
so
Are they here in town?
I think they are.
Okay, but not necessarily part of the church or,
He's still listed as a member.
okay.
I think, with med school and all those kinds of things,
Oh,
he
sure.
probably hasn't been here much, but
I'll take that info down. Later. And Janice, you've got a wedding coming up next weekend. Yeah, your son is getting married in New Jersey. So that's exciting.
Big Indian event.
Oh, really?
Yes, his fiance is.
They're everywhere.
That's amazing.
This Debbie Thomas is from South Asia, right?
Yeah.
Yes. That's what it said. Her parents. She or her parents? I don't
I
know.
think her parents, I think she was born. I didn't catch that.
Bob, interesting, many South Asians have the name Thomas. Because
The
of
Doubting Thomas went there?
affiliation with Thomas, and so it's the Thomas Church. And when I was at seminary, we had a man named M.M. Thomas teach missiology, and he had been the head of the World Council of Churches in the 60s and early 70s. His first 2 names were unpronounceable, unreadable. But that was one.
He went by his initials.
He went by M.M. Thomas, exactly. So, but that's where often you'll get in South Asia, folks who have that last name.
Yes, Brad sent me a list of all the people, their names, but not necessarily the pronunciations.
Yeah.
So, I've been working on it. But her father, and I think this is pretty common, it was among the Indian children that I taught in Philadelphia, goes by his last name. So the last name that his children take, that is his first name. And then there's a whole complication thing that I don't quite understand.
Okay, well, why don't we pick up the autobiographical information, it's front, back, and it's white. I thought it might be helpful for us to just kind of read through this. So that we have a little more background on her. I think probably maybe one of the things that's most important to us is that Liv Caldwell knows her and calls her a friend, so. So yeah, could we just, looking at the About Me page, could we read around paragraph by paragraph? And could I start over here with you, Rosemary?
Okay. Do I get the short one?
You got
that flag stop by?
Sure. Now we move on. Jolene, you wanna pick up?
I'm the author of A Faith of Many Rooms, Inhabiting a More Spacious Christianity, and Into the Mess and Other Jesus Stories. Reflections on the Life of Christ. I am a columnist and contributing editor to the Christian Century, and from 2014 to 2022, I was a staff writer for Journey with Jesus, a weekly webzine with a global church. I studied English literature at Wellesley College and Brown University and earned an MFA in creative writing at Ohio State University. Currently, I serve as minister for lifelong formation at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, California.
My husband Alex, our two all grown-up children, and our Labradoodle Ruby, all love living in Southern California. I was born in Kerala, South India, and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. Like many children of immigrants, I grew up juggling a complicated and often confusing mix of identities: South Asian, New England, suburban, evangelical, and feminist. In the murky in-betweenness of those identities, I learned that life is far more varied and messy than it is neat or certain, and that faith is not about finding once and for all answers, but about delving deeper and deeper into mystery.
Oh, no problem. Bob, you want to pick up with?
I was a preacher's kid and a church nerd, and also the annoying little brat who asked all the wrong questions about God, faith, doubt, life, and the Bible. I started writing as soon as I learned to read and spell. I was lucky to have a mom who introduced me early to the treasures of language and literature, and writing soon became my way of processing my world. Whenever I felt awed, bewildered, frightened, or joyful, I turned to pen and paper for refuge and grounding, and found that the Word made flesh is closer and more loving than I can ever imagine. I suppose not much has changed.
Next, back there, Stephanie?
I'm not quite as conflicted as I used to be, but I remain a seeker, an explorer, a believer, and a doubter. I write about faith because faith is both hard and life-giving, both beautiful and bizarre. I write because I don't know, and because God somehow meets me in that unknowing. I find solace in wrestling and seeking blessing on the page, and I hope that my journey gives others permission to wrestle too.
Books page.
Yep.
Words are the food I find most delectable and nourishing in my life of faith. When I don't know something, I write into the mystery of that unknowing, trusting light to emerge out of the shadows. When I find that my spiritual life has become abstract and unfocused, I craft sentences so that I can find God in the details and learn how to behold again. When I can't pray, I grab a pen and move my hand across the page until the writing becomes praise and petition, gratitude and lament. When every other tool I know of fails, I come crawling back to words, my first solace, my first power, and somehow or other they bear me up.
Speaking page. In addition to preaching, I enjoy leading retreats and workshops in spiritual journaling, memoir writing, reading scripture, and incorporating spiritual practices into daily life. We both believe and disbelieve 100 times in power, which keeps believing nimble.
Yeah, I just got this from her website, and so I put the headings for where you can find it. But it's helpful to know a little bit about her.
Hey, Stephanie,
Mhm.
I've never heard of that word webzine, like magazine, but webzine.
Yeah, probably, I would say back in the early 2000s, there started being these online magazines, which was kind of a new thing at the time. And so they called them webzines. Yeah.
What is global church?
Global Church, what is she saying?
That's in the first paragraph.
The first
The
paragraph.
webzine for the.
But it's the weekly webzine for the global church.
You know, I wonder if she is referring to the Methodist Church.
I would think that that is a title of a online platform, would be my guess. Isn't that
sort of ecumenical.
in town? I think they're a global light church that they're trying to kick out. I'm sorry, I'm just,
Are you talking about Wilson County?
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's different, that's different, yeah.
You're imagining it's a sort of an ecumenical,
No, I just remember reading the title, Global Church, about this
Yeah,
group that's meeting in a farm or a field and
Yeah.
causing problems with its neighbor and
right,
they want to get them out of there.
that's a different one,
Then I think they're called Global Church, something or other.
so it's not an organization or an entity that I should be familiar with.
No,
probably not.
and frankly, we sometimes talk about the global church.
Right.
Mhm,
In the
so-
sense of trying to be much more open to the voices of those whose experience of Christianity. Especially in the southern hemisphere and in formerly. Colonial places are giving different accents and voices to our understanding of Christianity.
Mhm.
But I think this is likely an online platform.
Good question. Very good. All right, so turning to the one that was in Journey with Jesus called Bearable Stories. All sorrows can be borne if you put them into a story. So what were some of your thoughts on this particular essay, Bob?
My first thought was doubt.
Doubt.
Wasn't sure that I accepted this statement from Denson.
Uh-huh.
But then the more I thought about it, the more I maybe recognized the wisdom of this story.
Okay.
I mean, of this statement. I was thinking about horrible, senseless events that have happened historically. But if we write a history and include them in it, that history is a story. And it makes us accept that those things happen. And they're bearable, I guess, because they're in the past. And we realize, as senseless as they were, the world didn't end with that occurrence.
See, that's interesting. That's interesting. One of the things that it made me think about was, Guy, I'm gonna tap you on this because you know the story better than I do. Was it Danielle Potts' dad that hid Jews?
Parents, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So some of you know the story of the little French village, Les Champs-en-Mer. There's a terrific book called Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed by a former Vanderbilt professor, names escapes me, that tells the story, but during the Second World War, that little town, under the leadership of a French Reformed pastor and his church, hid over 4,000 Jewish children. And mostly from southern France, Lyon and that area, and then got them over the border into Switzerland to safety. And they were helped by a lot of different people, but there was a network of farmers who would shelter sort of on the way, almost like an underground railroad. And Danielle's parents were one of those farm families. And tells a story about at one point, they had two teenage boys and they thought, you know, gosh, this is pretty boring just hanging around here. So we're gonna go into town to watch a movie. And Daniel was very clear about how he remembers how angry his father was when those kids came stumbling back to the farm. You know, understanding that if anybody was caught, that would have been disastrous for the entire family, but.
Yeah, and that story comes to mind. I don't know if all of you know this, but Danielle's been in the hospital for over 3 weeks and has had struggles with gallbladder and heart and then contracted COVID. And hopefully he's headed to rehab soon. I haven't heard that he has today, but they were hoping that he was heading to rehab soon. But thinking about those kinds of stories, the Holocaust is so horrific. And then there are these points of humanity within it that provide hope in the midst of this absolutely terrible thing that you can't possibly whitewash. Instead, you have to pretend it never happened, which is what some people are doing now. But to hear these amazing stories of the strength of humanity and love and faith, like those kinds of things, maybe, could be what he is thinking about. That's where my mind went. What are you thinking?
Well, my sister was killed in a car wreck when she was 22,
Yeah.
and in a way, sorrow was born by time, just,
Yeah,
yes, it was eventually born, but it was
right.
just a time, and obviously church, but I don't think about it being a story as how sorrow was born that way.
Right. Because
Maybe-
there's no good story you can tell about that, right?
Sure, I mean, my dad wrote an article for a book, and he wrote about going back to, he was a principal at a elementary school at the time. And he went back to school the next day and after the funeral, and some little first or second grader came up and said, well, I guess you were at the funeral yesterday, and just held his hand. And so, so there is that, but I don't know that that's bearing sorrow. That, I guess it is in a way, maybe.
Maybe not, maybe not. I think that's the point. And ultimately, I think that's what Debbie Thomas is calling into question. Because within our faith tradition, largely, there's been such a desire to rush to the good news instead of sitting with the hardness and letting Jesus show you how to move through it. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt.
Okay.
I was just thinking about what Bob said and what Ann said, and the stories that don't touch you personally and then become part of our history are different than the stories of your own, if they're personal.
That makes sense.
And so how you remember them and how you cope with them and react to them they're both valid and both very different.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that's an excellent point. Yeah. And I mean, in our Christian tradition, there is good news. But if we rush to give words to it, we may not be planting that good news in a place where it can grow, but actually could cause more hurt. In particular, some of the spiritual platitudes that people share with one another, I think she touches on those. Have you all had experience with those in your life?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
God needed another angel.
Yeah,
Seriously?
right,
Say that to a parent who's lost a child.
right. Mhm.
I,
And then, yeah.
go ahead, Ken.
Well, I really enjoyed this one, the other one I wasn't so keen on, but to me. I think she says there are some terrible things that happen. We can't explain it. And that's the end. If you've read Kate Bowler's book on everything happens for a reason and other lies, I've been told, you go through her story of developing cancer with a 2-year-old child, and the platitudes that people who come to visit her say to try and explain what to me is unexplainable. God has a purpose for you. And I think you just have to say there are some things, at least I don't understand, that are terrible, and it conflicts with having an all-powerful God, and
Yes.
I just don't think there's an answer, at least for me.
And one of the particular gifts of that book is the last chapter of the 10 things you should never say to a cancer patient.
Yeah.
If you've not read that, or if you need a copy of it, let me know and I'll print it out and send it to you. It is very helpful.
What's the book?
Everything happens for a reason, and otherwise I no longer believe.
I thought it was other lies I've loved.
I've loved, okay.
So, I don't know, actually.
She's so,
Actually,
That it is.
Let us check.
I wrote her name in the margin there.
Another lies at all.
Is that, yeah. I also recalled the book that we read several years ago by Rachel Held Evans, which addresses these stories in the most wonderful way.
And then consider her passing.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's not a good story to tell there either.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about with your question was the response that I heard out of the Christian church after 9/11 was so quick. Well, we need to forgive our enemies and all of that kind of stuff, which, you know, intellectually I know is true.
Sure.
But I remember reading early, little book, I can't remember who, but said with regard to forgiveness, you need to first, what is it, sort of like, you have to hate before you can heal.
Something like that, yeah.
And I've always thought that there has been, you know, we are given the language of lamentation in scripture.
Yeah.
And a way to say, how do you faithfully take this brokenheartedness to God? And I think if we don't walk through that journey and acknowledge the depth of the pain or the sense of spiritual long night of the soul, or the deus abscondius, the absence of God. And I think that becomes incredibly short-circuited and misguided. You have to hurt and hate before you can heal. That's what it is. You have to hurt.
That's good.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book on death and dying.
Yeah.
Tells you what you have to go through in terms of the number of stages, when you realize that you're going to die. And the first one is anger. And
Yeah.
then you keep on moving through different stages,
Yeah. And in our culture, in the United States at least, because that's where I live, we're not good at honoring those feelings that we consider ugly or unacceptable, and they have to be honored. My sisters have both been through a divorce, and especially my middle sister, she was married for a good while. And that was when, for me, I began to equate hate as the opposite of love, which was really helpful for me as I was moving through the fact that her husband had hurt her and was hurting their kids, and actually was hurting me too, because I had started to love him like a brother, that I had to realize my hate for him was so strong, because thank God I still love that guy, like even right now. And he's still being not nice, but I do still love him. And so like the willingness to sort of entertain and recognize this is a real feeling that I have can sometimes help you see the value of that feeling. So
it's also worthwhile for you to understand going through that. If you meet a neighbor or a patient or a friend and they're angry, and they may be angry at you just because you're near them, and yeah, put up with it.
yeah, one of the things I was told when I was going through hospital chaplaincy work was, because I did that for about a year and 3 months. And they said, if you walk into a room and somebody just yells at you and screams at you to get out of the room, you just take yourself out for a cup of coffee, because you just did some good pastoral care. There's literally nobody else in the hospital that they can really let happen besides you. And so they're stuck with these people coming in and asking them, have you had a bowel movement? What did you eat? You've got to finish this
I
water.
can be angry at those people too.
That happens to kids. There you go. So, what did you think about, well, just more thoughts on this. I won't lead you through. What were some other thoughts you had about this essay? I thought it was really beautiful.
Well, I was reminded of Donovan's sermon from a few weeks ago where he says this horrible birthday party scene,
Yeah,
and then Jesus feeding the 5,000, what a contrast.
yeah, absolutely.
But this was totally consistent with that sermon.
That's why I printed out the scripture, but I didn't think we would necessarily read it unless we wanted to, just to kind of have it as reference, because these have been in our lectionary recently. No.
Well, but the second story is, sort of Luke's account of the birth of John the Baptist, about an angel visiting the father of John the Baptist, and announcing that his wife, his
Yes.
wife Elizabeth would bear a child.
Oh, I didn't print that. That's right, that's right.
And I, just really that you ordained people, tell us about with the early church, there was a rivalry, wasn't there, between followers of Jesus and followers of John the Baptist? And some people thought John the Baptist was the Messiah, other than King Herod.
I don't know how much a rivalry, but John had a following. John definitely had a following, and people that,
Isn't there a group in India that still think that John the Baptist was the Messiah?
I don't know. Do you know?
Because,
I'm not familiar with that one. Yeah, but there was, I mean, he did have a very strong following. And ultimately, he did say to his followers, go and see him. I think this is who is supposed to come after me, because he knew his story. He knew what he was doing, John the Baptist did.
I thought that part of Luke Acts
Mhm.
was to confirm that Jesus is the one who we have been waiting for and who is now with us, not John the Baptist.
True. True. And remember, I think she even referenced it in here, that John, as he was in prison and getting close to the end of his life, was really wrestling with, is this really the Messiah? I mean, he had been so sure. But of course, now things are not going as well for him, and he's beginning to wonder, he's not out there working every day.
Why haven't I been
He's-
strong?
Yeah, but he's wondering, is this really the Messiah? I hope it's really the Messiah. Because can you imagine thoughts going through his head? If not, then have I wasted my whole life? Have I led these people astray? Or is everybody gonna be
He's the
okay?
Messiah, why is he allowing me to still be here?
Could be. I think that would be, I'm assuming that when you're in prison, you ask lots of questions about your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
He was imprisoned as well at a hilltop fortress. I think it's called Paris, which is on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. It's Herod and their paranoia had built a number of palaces that could be easily defended. The one most of us are familiar with is Masada, which is over on the western side of Dead Sea and highly visited and well touristed and equipped for tourists, so you can take a funicular to the top of it. The one that's over in Jordan, they have a path, but nothing else. And so the first time I went in '94, I walked up that thing and about stroked by the time I got to it. And you want to talk about a bleak and barren landscape.
Wow.
And I was thinking, he's sitting up there and maybe looking out some prison bar windows and thinking, is this all there is? I mean, it's, there are no buildings left or anything. It's just the mound. In Megiddo, there's still some remnants and ruins of buildings, but there's nothing at the top of the Macarius. And it's a weak vista for sure.
But if he knew he was baptizing the Messiah, wouldn't you think that he would also have expectations of being freed or actions by Jesus that would
Yeah,
remove him from this imprisonment?
right. Why won't you take this away from me? And that's, I mean, how many people have lost children and said, why would you do this to me? How many people have had cancer and said, why me? All of those horrible things. I mean, that's a real question that a lot of people can relate to.
Didn't you love this one? It put it, Teresa of Avila, Lord, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. What else from this essay?
I like her writing style,
Yeah.
the way that she, in a paragraph, will say, maybe the point, and then go on, and then she says that 5 times. So you really get it. And then she says in the next paragraph, we still, and she says that numerous times. And then over on the next page where she says, what Jesus did, he withdrew, he sought, he lingered, and then he fed. I just think her writing style is really so clear.
She really takes you on a journey because she has so much imagination in her writing, which is beautiful, and such a contrast from what we've been reading. Not that one is better than the other, they're different. They're written for different purposes, you know. But yeah, it was kind of a nice change too, yeah. So much great imagination in this, and she invites you to imagine with her, which I love. What did you think about the point that Jesus found out and then he went away to be alone with God?
I mean, that's really powerful. He felt solitude, he lingered over his pain. And then, question, why, and then.
Yeah.
And then she goes on to say, some things are too terrible for words. Some words can't be salvaged for the neat story.
Yeah.
So we honor the silence. But I think for me, writing down that story that can't even be reached allows me to then linger in silence over those words in front of me.
Yeah. You like to write?
I'm not good at it. I have learned in retirement, I started writing and it's bad. But
But it's almost like a journal writing.
it's for me, and it doesn't matter that it's bad.
Well, maybe it's not academic or, you know, publisher might have something to say about it,
I
but
find it, I've been writing on my iPad, and I find that I'm going back to that journal that I have.
Yeah.
And sitting with some of those little short. Sitting with that again in silence and seeing it with new eyes.
yeah. But the sitting with it, that there's something about allowing that space to be with all of those feelings, to sit in the reality of it, and her pointing to Jesus going up to do that with God is what is so powerful to me. That reminder that, you know, there may be people around us who aren't up for that challenge. You know, they might just, in the silence and in the pain, they can't help it. They just want to say something because they're feeling that pain too. Even though there may be those friends who can just come and sit in the pain with you. But to know that Jesus knew that God would sit with him in that. And then to be able to believe that God will accept us with all of our mixed feelings, and whether it's pain or anger or hate or joy, that God is there for us in that. I think it's such a powerful point for her. And I mean actual point, like pointing to God, you know what I mean? Well, and then he comes down. This was so great, because I hadn't really thought about this before. That he comes down and there's all these people and he starts teaching them, feeding them with spiritual food. And then he feeds them with bread and fish. And her point being, that's not just Jesus. You know, because of course, well, okay, Jesus can do that. Jesus can feel this huge loss in his life and then turn around and show up for the masses. But her point being, where is it? How much more credible and relevant we, his followers, would be if we follow Jesus' examples as we confront the world's ongoing horrors. This is the last paragraph. Some things are too terrible for words. Some hurts can't be salvaged with a neat story. So honor the silence, create space for the grief, mourn freely. And when you're ready, feed the people around you whatever you've got. Somehow it will be enough, even if you can't explain how or why. This is how we make the sorrows bearable. Just whatever you've got. I think that's very beautiful. You know, in some cultures, the mourning freely is very visible and audible. Some cultures are much more comfortable with people wailing. Much more comfortable with people throwing themselves on the ground or at the grave or close to the casket or whatever it might be. Some cultures are much more comfortable with that than we are. And I think sometimes it can be like, oh, I don't want to see that because it's hard to watch. But I think it's, you know, there may be some wisdom in that too. But if you're not someone who needs or wants to wail out loud, you don't have to be, you know. But the mourning freely, whatever that looks like for you or for those around you, that's important. Okay.
One book, and I'm sure you have copies in your office. Glenn Davidson wrote about reading, and we had some classes about that. And I remember him talking about using stories through the reading process, how important telling the stories are to move through reading.
That's great. All right, let's switch to the other essay. This one was in the Christian Century, and it's called Metaphors for the Spiritual Life. I've been an onion peeler and an excavator. I hope God will form me into a bridge.
I didn't get that.
You didn't get it?
No. How does an onion peeler have to do with the bridge?
Okay.
She's a different thing at different points in her life.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, because I could have used two different things. It doesn't.
Exactly, yeah,
Okay.
she could have used different things. Did anybody pick up on the onion peeling part and what that was kind of related to in the essay? Yeah,
Different layers.
different layers, and at that point in her life, she was sort of wrestling with having been raised in what seemed like a too conservative faith experience for her. And so she was needing to kind of deal with that and find really where her faith was, what her faith looked like. And so she was peeling back these parts of her.
And excavating by digging deeper, is that what she?
I think so, but she did that, those were at different times in the process. So like early, because this was the prompt that she would give to her spiritual direction classes and say, okay, what's a spiritual metaphor for you, for your spiritual life right now? And she said, let's see. Trying to think. Some students head straight to the Gospels. They describe wandering in the wilderness, abiding in the vine, taking up a cross, or feasting on the bread of life. Those are wonderful metaphors. Others turn to the language of the body, running a marathon, wrestling in the dark, climbing a mountain, struggling in labor. Also very powerful metaphors. Still others draw on nature, geography, architecture, or art. My spiritual life is a garden, a pool, a forest, a cave. I'm sewing a quilt, demolishing a house, restoring a painting, composing a symphony. And those would be all different people who might say that at any point in time. But she says assigning that prompt can reveal so much to someone, even at themselves, as they're considering where they are right at that point in their life. And so she goes on talking about, I feel like an onion, I told my director. I was of course crying, which I totally relate to onions. They're so big. I'm like, no, onion powder, that's all we have at my house, unless Greg cooks. I'm an onion being peeled, and I'm afraid that when the peeling is finally over, I'll have nothing left. And so that's part of her spiritual journey. And then she goes on to say, it's interesting to me now that my experience at that point of the spiritual life then was purely subtractive, a wholesale falling apart. I couldn't see that I was receiving anything. I couldn't understand that I was participating in the peeling, or that the peeling might be for life and not death, or that the love and generosity of God were intimately involved, even though the process stung. And I think for her, she's giving it to her students who are there for spiritual direction, because people are wanting to delve deeply into their spiritual life. So this was a powerful image for her. And some of us may be able to kind of identify with what she's talking about, and some of us may not. I haven't felt like I've had to deconstruct my faith. And so, you know, that's more something I'm sort of looking in on, and appreciate her imagery to help me kind of understand how she was feeling about that. But yeah, I think that's so interesting.
Stephanie, I was really drawn to this essay.
Yeah.
And in part, when I started my DMIN project or program, we had to write a 50-page essay qualifying exam to get into the program.
Really?
And you had to define what your metaphor for ministry was. And I never thought about it, right? You know, what I usually talk about pastors, well, you're the shepherd, right? You're leading this flock, you're tenderly caring for them. You know, when I was coming in, it was very avant-garde to say, well, you're not a shepherd. If you're in a large church, you need to be a rancher. That, you know, you've got all these different competing groups. So there were a lot of metaphors flying around. And I finally settled on one that has sustained me through all these years.
Yeah.
Many of you know Ted Loder's little book of prayer poems called Gorillas of Grace. And that to me has been my primary metaphor for at least what I do vocationally. That I may look, you know, on a good day when I clean up like somebody who belongs in, you know, 37205 zip code.
Yeah.
But I understand my work as undermining the dominant narrative of the culture with God's gospel.
Yeah.
And so this notion of Gorilla of Grace has been incredibly important for me. I think it'd be interesting to go a little bit of her line to talk about what other, you know, metaphors personally for my spiritual journey,
Yeah.
but vocationally being able to articulate that. Plus it got me into the program.
Yeah. No,
It was a really helpful exercise. And I hadn't really thought about it until reading those and the plethora of metaphors she used and where she drew them from, I thought was really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I had a hard time imagining my own metaphor. I still haven't settled on one. Did any of you decide to think about that a little bit to a metaphor for your spiritual life? Bob, what'd you come up with?
I didn't come up with anything, but I did think about it.
You did. Okay, what did you think? What came to mind? Do you mind
Oh,
sharing?
something centered on learning,
Okay.
trying to really gain an understanding of my faith.
Something about learning. Maybe you're a star pupil.
Hmm?
Maybe you're a star pupil.
No, not.
I heard that you
I was a
read.
pre-med major who did practice law.
There-
I was not a star pupil. I found out they were giving doctor of law degrees.
Organic chem, huh?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, that's a killer, man. But you know what? I mean, think about, Bob, how much of your time and your thinking, you're committing to scripture and theology right now in your life. I mean, maybe there is a metaphor there with that learning that really fits you right now.
Yeah.
I knew I was doing a poor job when all I could come up with laundry. I was like, my spiritual life is laundry. And I'm like, what is that about? And so I'm like, laundry just always is not done. What is that? But then I sort of shied away from it because actually my dryer died yesterday. So I think that's why laundry was on my mind. So I mean, maybe I could work with that, but. Yeah,
I don't know whether this is relative or not, but what came to me was a tornado.
oh,
And a tornado sort of, this spiral represented the life, we live in this terrible, this work-driven, busy world. And my spiritual life is down here in the middle of this coming tornado, struggling daily to, get up higher, and have it be more important than all of this chaos that's around me.
oh, wow. So so your spiritual life is down at the bottom of this whirling world. And you're trying to get it to come up more to the middle rather than to be down at the bottom. But that's really hard because of
It's a constant struggle.
constant struggle. You know what? My son loves weather. He watches all of these. He loves to learn about weather, but he also likes to look at the aftermath stories and things. And so we often talk about weather, and he was like, yeah, tornadoes are so bad, hurricanes are so bad. And I mean, they are in terms of what they do to people and the landscape. Like, there's definitely an awful part about it, but they're also just a part of the natural world. And if there weren't houses and people in the way, then that hurricane and that tornado really could be imagined as part of the creative process. You know, because think about when God is creating, there's wind and there's water, and there's weather can really be part of this creative process. And so what if something new is being made in you as you're trying to keep this central?
I really thought her image of the excavator
Yeah,
out of the destruction
yeah.
was quite beautiful.
Mhm.
And then this notion of trying to be a bridge for people who are going through that to what she's come out with before, of course.
Yeah.
Remember what the Latin word for bridge is? Pontiff. That's where we get,
Oh,
that's where we get the Pope, pontiff. is
that's
bridge.
great.
So, truly understood, the pontiff's job is to be that bridge between God's people, so.
That word for bridge, that's new to me. I enjoy that.
It was, Stephanie, you're mentioning hurricanes. I bet my reaction to a hurricane is completely different from Tampa native
Yeah.
Will Wellman's. I think of hurricanes as maybe bringing rain up here to Tennessee to break a drought or break a summer heat wave.
Yeah.
I don't think of the hurricanes as being so destructive to us in Tennessee.
Yeah. It's just interesting, so many aspects of
Well, the
it.
other thing about a hurricane in terms of a metaphor, Mary was in one hurricane. And in the center of the eye.
Yeah.
Things just stop and it's perfectly calm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sun is shining, and then another way, the other side of the hurricane that you.
Picture two large elm trees.
Okay.
The storm came from one direction, one tree went down. We went outside for 20 minutes with bright sunshine. It was just amazing. And then the wind started coming from the opposite direction. And the other elm tree went down, this time on top of my dad's car. But it was amazing to see this, the power.
Yes.
From two different directions.
Was this in Jersey, when you were a girl?
And you can think about that as a metaphor of bad, good, bad.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
My mom always said, because she lived in Corpus Christi, Texas for a long time, and then, which is where I was born, and then we moved to Oklahoma. And she always said, you knew the path of the hurricane and you could get away from it.
Oh.
You move to Oklahoma and you have no idea where the tornado is going to touch down.
Right.
So you just hunker down in a safe place and hope it doesn't
Yeah,
pass over you.
yeah, yeah. True.
Listening to the radio yesterday and I was with Sports Channel, so these guys are pretty much dupes anyway, but they're talking about how painful it is to hear about hurricanes 6 or 7 days before, you know, I don't need to know about the hurricane. But if you want to listen to the news, they've got this another hurricane that you've already heard about. It's not gonna hit the United States at all, but
Yeah, yeah.
just different people complaining about different things.
True. And
Well, I did have to deconstruct, or do something, what it was, but. And it's probably still the most powerful thing probably the most powerful thing that I ever done, and when we first came here, Grace was just something I did not. Grace was the foreign I did, I mean. But Casey, his baptisms, it's a scripture verse, but it's just like, as he's baptized, as he has the baby coming out, he says, see what love the Father has for us, and that we've all been called children of God.
And so we,
And so we are, and it was always been the most grounding thing, seeing him do that and thinking, yes, babies make sense. They're so, yes, we love babies, and if that's how God is, that's always a picture in my mind of for that, helping me kind of could reconstruct, I guess.
so that's weird, you know. Any other metaphors come to mind for people? Anything you could think of?
I sort of see myself, kind of like a pitcher
Oh,
of water or margaritas or something. A pitcher, a full pitcher, and, cause I grew up in the church and you just always believed what you heard, you know. There was no reason to question anything or to wonder if, you know, if this is what you really feel and stuff like that. But then as you learn more, you might pour some of it out and fill it up again with what you've learned. And it just continues over and over.
Yeah.
So along with the learning, like Bob.
yeah, that's great. That's great. This is such a different turn from where we've been this summer. Yeah, what?
and the, what you said kind of reminded me, I worked with a pastor who used the French Reformed baptismal liturgy. And the promise at the end is, for you little child, Jesus Christ has come, and he's fought and suffered. For you, he entered the shadow of Gethsemane and the horror of Calvary. For you, he uttered the cry, it is finished. For you, he rose from the dead. For you, little child, even though you do not know it, but in this way, the word of the gospel becomes true. We love because God first loved us. But it's this for you, all the things that were done, that we, you know, have no volition in, and all we can say is thank you. And I've not used it I don't think I've ever used it here. I've used it in other places, but I think it's, it gets right what we understand about the theology of baptism.
Do you all, I don't know. It seems like this is easy to miss for some people. That when we do, speaking of baptism, when we celebrate a baptism in church, and we're all there together, and why it's a public thing. It's not just because we're gonna make promises on behalf of that baby. It's also because it's an opportunity for us to remember our baptism. Even if you were a baby when you were baptized, to remember the promises of baptism that still apply to us, whatever age we are, wherever we are in the world. And so it's really a reaffirming that also takes place. Yeah,
I have a somewhat different, remembrance of my baptism. I was raised in the Baptist church.
Yeah.
And my father was in the ministry. And so when I, accepted Jesus as my savior, when I was about 7, we had the baptism service. And, what really struck me was the one thing that I remember with my parents. And, he let me down into the water. And I remember the water just rushing into my face. And then he raised me up. And then, the image of being buried with Christ. The water.
yeah,
And then being raised with him.
Yeah.
And saved. And all of that is just imprinted in my brain. It's such a memory. And when I have a spirit baptism in the church now, and it's always in the service, something about remembering on baptism. All of those scenes come back to me. And it's a very special experience for me. I don't think that anybody else in the room has the same.
yeah.
Remembrance, but.
I don't remember all that, but my dad was Baptist preacher when I was little, and I was baptized by him in the baptistry. I mean, I was a Baptist as well.
Okay.
And at 7, my dad baptized me, but
Yeah.
I don't remember an experience other than, my dad's gonna push me underwater and I need to, I hold my nose or not? Do I need to hold my nose when I go under? So I have a different remembrance of that. It's not a bad thing. It's just,
I didn't have the opportunity to hold my nose, no. But I enjoyed it.
I'm always puzzled during baptism. After the baptism, the next statement, and we do infant baptism, and the next statement is remembering our own baptism.
Right.
And I don't remember a single thing. I was 2 months old.
Yeah.
Is that remembering us? I don't know how we remember our own baptism. I mean, we can remember somebody else's baptism and the process of baptism, but I'm just wondering about the terminology.
I'm really sorry you can't remember. This is such
There's a lot of other
a
things.
special memory.
Yeah. And I think, yeah.
I think for me, Ken, what has been helpful over the years is kind of actively remembering, first of all, that my parents did that for me, my congregation took those vows for me. And maybe most importantly, God's promises to me are, I'm remembering those and I'm glad for it at that time.
Yeah.
That was something that I wrestled with probably early in my ministry. And I used to say to folks that I grew more in my sacramental theology in the first 5 years of ministry than in any other aspect. That the sacraments became real to me in a way they had never honestly been before. And, so, yeah, I had a seminary professor who, when he was busy, he would just stop and put his hand on his head and say, remember, you've been baptized. That baptism grounds our identity, whose we are, not who we are, not what we do. It's that fundamental understanding that I am God's beloved, I am God's
So you're
child.
saying it's more a remembrance of the process of baptism rather than
Yours
own
particular.
particular one.
Yeah, and more, yeah, a remembrance of the promises that Jesus is giving. You belong to Christ, and the family of faith around you is an important part of your faith life, and that you're marked for God's service forever. We had well, I don't know if you did actually, but James Kay was at Princeton when I was there, and he talked about, and this is a little controversial, but he talked about how you can't wash that baptism off. You can't lose that baptism, and he told a story, and he got real tearful about it, about a friend of his who had a son that just completely turned away from the church and was going his own way and like hated everything about the church, and in some ways was really acting out against his family and everything that he had grown up with. And in that situation, Dr. K was saying to him, he can't wash off that baptism. He still belongs to God, even if there are aspects of his life or of, you know, living out that baptism that he's not doing, he cannot wash that off. And that was very encouraging for that father.
After the movie, Toy Story came out.
Yeah,
If y'all remember that marvelous animated film where Andy writes his name on the bottom of the cowboy's foot. And how many really good illustrations or baptismal sermons I heard using that as an illustration, very concrete illustration.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty cool.
I had a young man in my church in Indiana named Mark Sadler. And I will always love this kid. I mean, I love them all, but I don't always remember their names. But Mark Sadler, I remember, he was so shy. And if you got too close to him, he had red hair and freckles. And if anybody got too close to him, he would just start to turn red. He was just so shy, but such a deep thinker. And there was a time when his mom was feeling really disenchanted with the Presbyterian church, and she started going to kind of a new mega church that had come up, non-denominational church. And he started going both places, and he was like, is that okay? And I said, I think it's okay. You know, so he would go both places. Well, he came in, he made an appointment to come into my office, and I was like, how red is this kid's face gonna get when he's in my office with me? He's so precious. He came in and he said, I want to ask you a question. I said, okay. He said, I want to be baptized. And I said, okay. He's not looking at me. He's just looking down. I want to be baptized. And I said, okay. You haven't been baptized? He was like, no, I was baptized as an infant, but I want to be rebaptized. And he looked up at me a little bit, and then he put it back down. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, over at the other church, they have this pool, and you get put down in it. And he talked about the dying and rising with Christ. And he said, I really feel like I want to do that. And then he said, and I want you to do it. And I was like, oh. I was thinking, I was like, first of all, those guys are never gonna let me do it. Second of all, and I told him, let me think about it a little bit. Because I knew where he was coming from in his faith experience. I knew what he was saying, and I didn't want to like say, those pastors over there aren't gonna let me in the font, because that's not what the moment called for, you know. He was really, this was something happening in his relationship with Jesus Christ. And I, you know, so I said, let me think about it. So I got back with him and I said, okay, so here's the thing. And I explained to him that in the Presbyterian church, the way we do baptisms helps us emphasize an important part of baptism. And the way churches that do believer baptism, specifically, they emphasize another part of it, probably more so than we do. But it's really all the same thing. And I said, for us, we emphasize when we baptize babies that before you even know that you need God or there is a God, God is already active in your life. God is already claiming you. And that happened for you. So we told this to Mark. And I said, now with the font, there's such an emphasis on you making a choice for Jesus, which is also a beautiful thing. And yes, we do that in confirmation, but this is a very particular way to do it. And so that is emphasized, that you get to make a choice. And I said, I see your heart, and to me, if you want to be rebaptized, that is absolutely wonderful. And I said, but I don't want to be the one in the water with you. I want to be the one standing right outside the font, who's just there celebrating this amazing moment in your life, in your relationship with Jesus, and reminding you of what we've already emphasized, that God has always been there for you and bringing you to this point. And that's not going to stop your whole life. And so I got to go and stand there with his mom and dad and his brother and stuff, and it was pretty cool. And there were tears. His mom and I both cried, but it was pretty wonderful. But just so incredible to just really be able to see this kid really making a decision and wanting to do it in a particular way. And there's not really anything wrong with that, but just helping him see the larger picture of why we do what we do as a way to bless him even that much more was really important. Mark Sadler, sometimes I creep on his Facebook page now. That's not weird, is it? My face. Oh, goodness. Any other comments you guys want to share? All right, why don't you tell us, Will, about your article or guide?
Just at the end, I really encourage you to try to articulate what might be a metaphor for you. I think we do this in one of the chapters in the Companions in Christ curriculum.
Oh, cool.
Wrestle with that a little bit, but I think it is a worthy spiritual practice to try to define what that is. Yes. Or even, is there, a particular lens of scripture?
Yeah.
But I love that she moved out of scripture and moved into these other realms as well. Yeah.
Well, Ken had a question or comment.
Well, I just would be interested in people's thoughts of the news that I read. One of the states, the director of education has mandated a curriculum on the Bible for all students in the state. I don't know whether that's Oklahoma or.
It's Oklahoma.
That was Louisiana.
And
I wonder what they're
to
gonna
me,
do
that's
about the
quite
passage.
controversial, and I would be wondering what you thought of teachers being able to teach the Bible without any background education.
I think it's interesting that some of those people that might be advocating that, when they get in their church, say women shouldn't be teaching the Bible. Maybe to little kids, but they shouldn't be in leadership roles.
The other concern I had is, would you also be breaking some pornography laws in that state by allowing the Bible to be in the curriculum?
You know what? That's a really interesting point.
Sure.
Oh, there's some stuff. But yeah, if you were a book banner, that'd be something you.
You have to take out certain chapters there to make it.
But Ken, I went to a Presbyterian college, and we were required to have for graduation 12 academic hours of religion courses in order to graduate. And I expect you don't find that troubling at all.
Was it college?
But
It's college.
Was
and
college?
it was a religious college. It was Presbyterian. It wasn't a
Yeah,
public school.
So you knew what you were signing up for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I have some significant, concerns about how the Bible would be taught.
At an elementary school.
Well, I wasn't clear to me reading the articles
What age?
what age would be taught and whether it would be a mandatory part of every year's curriculum or how they were doing it, or you just have to do it once in 12 years or something like that.
Haven't there been several instances where in some adult educational setting here at Westminster, we appreciate the biblical grounding that people raised in the Baptist church received when they were kids, and how much, you know, more biblical knowledge they might have than others.
I think there's a difference between knowledge and what you take to heart. Because from my perspective, as a woman only, not to mention the other things, but I'll just speak from my perspective, the Bible can be weaponized against me. And still to this day, I can feel it in the little hairs on my arms when I've walked into an area where they wouldn't, I mean, they don't even have to say very much before I start to realize where I am. That there are people that wouldn't see me as a colleague. And I think that it can be weaponized against people in lots of different ways, not just, as a woman.
Well, anyway, that was something that when she talked about wrestling with faith,
Yeah.
came up, plus what we were reading in our previous book. And
That's
the
good.
last year in terms of struggling with that.
So sex ed is out of the schools and the Bible is in.
Yeah.
Likely.
But you
So
can choose
no-
anything.
no
I
comment.
hate to be a Christian saying that,
You have a hair.
that's the wrong thing.
And my guests are not even gonna get song and salt.
Did you want to say one more thing?
The other thing is, if you're talking about public school, education for all, and then you're
Yeah.
imposing on all religious education, that's just, in my opinion, that is just absolutely wrong.
Well,
But
the argument is
it
they're
is,
not gonna
but-
teach it as a religious book, just something that's.
Or,
Very
or
specific
I'm
and
sure
change
it's
the
an
result.
elective at the school where I taught in Philadelphia, it was a private school. And the elective was the Bible as literature. But it was an elective, and it was approached not from a religious standpoint at all. It was, it was an elective offered in the English department. But I think going back to the Bible being taught, in schools, you are certified to teach particular things. I was certified to teach music, not science.
Yeah.
And no one, to my knowledge, is certified in a public school to teach religion. Not in a K through 12 school. College is different.
Yeah.
And it just crosses all sorts of boundaries. And I grew up in it. And I have many, many friends in Tulsa, and it is on Facebook every single day.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure it is.
and the people who, I only see the people who are just adamantly against it, and a number of them are Jewish. And the people who I guess don't mind or don't know what to think, they really don't say anything.
Yeah.
Not from what I've seen. It's curious.
Well, tell us what your article is for next week.
So Guy has pushed me to share one of my own essays.
Oh.
We're gonna be reading an essay of mine that was published in the North American Review last summer. And it will be included in an anthology this December, Best Spiritual Literature Anthology. And so we'll get a taste of my home state and some other stuff.
Nice.
Thanks. So it's called To a Great Egret. The print is pretty small. So Chris is gonna email out a PDF of it if this print is too small. There's a lot of words. They had to fit them
Oh
in.
my gosh.
Uh-oh, Susan doesn't like it.
I don't want
I just
to
can't. Oh, I was- I get
This
it,
is my
yeah.
read. Readers on top of my readers.
Yeah, that's good fun.
So,
This article is handed out by a lot of ophthalmologists.
2020 vision stuff. So Chris, if you're not on her email list, just email her. But she has a copy online where you can make it bigger.
Could even, if you wanted to stop by and ask her to like blow one up and print it out for you, she could probably do that too.
It'd be about 20.
Good. So we'll discuss this. I'll also have, a couple other things I'll bring in, shorter things, like, I've got a poem and a song I want us to read too. But we're gonna talk about this and you'll see as you read it, there's a lot of spiritual throughout that will.
Is North American Review the same periodical that like Whitman and
Yeah.
Thoreau would have written for?
It's the oldest continuous literary magazine in the US, and Abraham Lincoln, Walt Whitman, a bunch of famous names have all published in it. Don't clap yet, you might hate it.
We can read it. All right.
Maybe that's my point, right? I think it's so small you can't read it.
Blessings to all of you this week and those who couldn't be with us, and maybe you'll come up with some different metaphors for where you are in your spiritual life right now. Have a great week.
It's 6 weeks. She's on this land.
She's. There should be. I said, if I ever. Yeah.
People think that. Oh, yeah, yeah. It's very. Yeah. A couple shelters.
So,
Yeah.
what do we need to do to be ready for the section?
I am still figuring out the schedule, but probably not. But if it is anything, it'll be that first section. But I'll send an email.
Something I'm trying to.
And I'm raising the PK.
Yeah, I think it's necessary to read unless you're interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, we'll, most likely, I just will have like a show.
Lunch or something.
Yeah, that's the,
Then you're.
yeah, that's a huge point that he made. This kind of lot is what man.
Oh, thanks.
It's not happening.
But we can only have to do this. Nothing more than I can.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's okay. All right. That's all right. Well, it's all right. Where are you going?
He is. Very long to see you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, enjoy, that's exciting. And,
I mean, it doesn't interfere with her.
the spouse future.
And then her son. There. We'll get it Saturday.
Are they living in? Is that right?
Nothing but now, it's good to know.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, he's very clear. He really loves to visit. And as long as.
Yeah, my brother lived in Hoboken for a while. Before being in the city.
Yeah.